Good morning and good afternoon to you all, and welcome to this webinar on how to unleash the potential of data for better lives, the World Development Report 2021, co-organized by PARIS21, the OECD's Development Cooperation Directorate, and the World Bank. My name is Johannes, and I'm the coordination lead of the Bern Network on Financing Data for Development, and I will be facilitating today's session. Now, we have more and more participants joining as I speak, but since we have a very full and exciting agenda, we would like to start on time. So the purpose of this event today is really to put the spotlight on the huge potential that exists for data to support effective and inclusive policymaking to improve lives everywhere. And we will be hearing today insights from the World Bank seminal World Development Report 2021, Data for Better Lives, which is the first publication in this series to be dedicated to data for development. And of course, while great potential exists for data, so too do several barriers that prevent us from realizing and tapping into the full potential it has. And this event today will also aim to help us all understand better how we can create the enabling conditions for data to deliver better lives. And it's in this context that we will also have a panel discussion that will look in particular at the challenge and the question of financing for development data. Now, we have a very distinguished lineup of speakers and a very exciting discussion. So let us begin. For those of you in the audience, please do engage with us in the discussion by submitting any questions or comments you may have in the Q&A function, which colleagues will be checking throughout the event. To our speakers, we will aim to stick to the time. So if you can please limit your interventions to the allocated time, you may hear from me otherwise. So please do keep that in mind. Now, without further ado, it is my great pleasure to introduce and welcome and give the floor to our introductory speaker, Mr. Jorge Moreira da Silva, who is the director of the OECD's Development Cooperation Directorate and the co-host of this webinar. So, Jorge, the floor is yours. You have 5 minutes.
Thank you, Jorge. I hope that I will be the first one fulfilling your request for the 5 minutes. Good afternoon and good morning to you. I'm really glad to welcome you along with our co-hosts, PARIS21 and the World Bank. I'd like to start by congratulating the World Bank for another excellent and relevant World Development Report. I'm particularly delighted that the World Better Lives, the theme of this year's report. Data-driven organizations like the OECD, they are part of our DNA. They are critical for designing and delivering people-centered policies for better lives, to draw on the OECD's motto, people's lives for good. Our policy advice and recommendations must be formed and shaped by best comparative data. And data that meet the highest quality standards. We must harness innovation and new research methods for more granularity and timeless, and to share data so that it empowers citizens we serve, to decision makers, policymakers, innovators, civil society, and business are demanding and using more and better data to drive social, economic, and environmental well-being trend. COVID-19 has tested and proved just how life-critical, timely, and reliable data are saving lives by helping to track the spread of the virus, informing the response and recovery packages so that they work for people and business that are most vulnerable and where the needs are greatest. Over the past years, and I'm going to cut the camera because it seems that the connection is not great. Over the past year, data, statistics, and science turned a corner underpinning public debate and decision-making. The new technologies have upped the game, giving faster and easier access to large quantities of data, but also raising new challenges, privacy and civil rights. The crisis has also made it clear that the availability of quality data and statistics is a global concern just like climate change mitigation, research and financial stability, data are a global public good when available and used and people. But as the World Development Report recommends, we need to create more equitable access to benefits of data. For data to deliver as a public good, countries and the international community need to join forces to ensure adequate investments in national and international works and make them fit for today's digital economy and society. And global data governance needs to include the voice of low-income countries and uphold rights to privacy and civic freedoms. My key message today is that for data to serve everyone equitably, we need to step up collective action and ensure that all countries are in a position to realize the potential of data for their development. And as this World Development Report also PARIS21's Guide Development 2.0, but also our ongoing dialogue and research with OECD members show there is still a lot of work to do to get the right foundations and building blocks in place for sustainable national statistics and data system. Now it's the time to advance this agenda. When taking decisive action based on data and the necessity to do so are so evident, but also meet the promise of leaving one behind. As long as the people who policymakers serve are not counted, especially the poorest and most marginalized populations, they will be invisible and excluded from progress. Through development cooperation, and I'm finishing, Jure, through development cooperation and demand-driven technical assistance, we must work with countries to overcome the vicious cycle of weak political demand for data. In fragile situations with greater governance, data are less likely to be open and shared and are less likely to be trusted by citizens and international actors. So we are really seeing a vicious cycle. Low prioritization and public investment in foundational data and official statistics are also result in on ODA for censures and expenditure on a range of demographic, social, and economic surveys. Ending this vicious cycle needs concerted reforms. And this is my last word. Concerted reforms, strategies, investment, and good practice guidelines. And the OECD is committed to this agenda. And indeed, today, we are publishing the first ever data for development profiles. They show how ODA is invested in national statistics and data systems country by country. And I invite you to read this report and use its findings to make the case for ensuring that data and evidence are at the heart of our efforts. I'm sorry for the bad internet connection, but I hope that the most relevant part of the message was shared with you. And again, many thanks for this joint effort with the World Bank and with PARIS.
Thank you very much, George. We heard you and the message, and thank you for setting the scene and for the strong call to action. I think we do indeed all have a role to play, and you have highlighted very much the importance and the role that data has to play as a public good, but also in the context of the COVID recovery. So thank you very much for that. This brings us very nicely to the first segment of the event, which is a presentation by the World Bank on the World Development Report 2021, Data for Better Lives. And I am delighted to introduce our presenters from the World Bank, Mr. Dean Jolliffe, who is co-director of the World Development Report and lead economist of the Development Data Group, Mr. Philip Wahlberg and Mr. Daniel Mahler, both economists with the Development Group, who will introduce us to the key insights from the report and share with us a vision for how we can achieve the full potential of data for development. Dean, colleagues, over to you. You have 15 minutes, and I understand you have slides.
Indeed, yep. So thanks so much. So on behalf of my co-directors, Bob Cull and Vivian Foster, and our report manager, Malar Virapan, I thank all of you today for joining to give us a chance to give you a quick overview of the World Development Report 2021, Data for Better Lives. I'm going to start with an example. So next slide. Where we aim to convey what we mean by data for better lives. In 1999, a cyclone hit the state of Odisha in India, killing 10,000 people. In response to this tragedy, the government, realizing they could have done more to prevent this outcome, invested in the Odisha State Disaster Management Authority. The authority was tasked with creating better systems to collect, process, and analyze weather data, creating valuable information, and then disseminating that information quickly enough that it could affect outcomes. When a similar sized cyclone hit Odisha in 2013, the capture, processing, and broadcasting of warning data led to the successful evacuation of nearly 1 million people, saving countless thousands of lives. Next slide. The report then is ultimately about how can we leverage more value from data in ways that make people's lives better. We differentiate this report and that we narrow the focus of this question to ask in particular how data can help the lives of people who are poor, marginalized, and frequently underrepresented in many data systems. Next slide. In the case of Odisha, it was the collection, processing, and analytics of data by the government that led to better outcomes, but other actors can lead to better outcomes for people as well. When civil society, individual citizens, and academia use data, they can be a powerful force to create greater transparency and accountability of both the public and private sectors. We offer many examples of this in the report. As one quick example, the city government of Bogota, Colombia, used data collected by individuals through an innovative data program called Safety Pin to take measures to improve the safety of women in this city. Similarly, private firms can use data in ways that can improve decision-making, efficiency, and better match supply and demand. All of this can lead to economic growth and corresponding improvements in economic well-being. Next slide. A central attribute of data, and really a focus of our report, is to recognize that data is non-rivalrous or completely reusable. And yet data is frequently used once and filed away. For this reason, we assert in the report that much of the value of data to improve lives is left untapped. An important message of the report is that we all need to work on finding ways to get more value out of data, find ways to reuse, repurpose data to provide insights to unexpected problems. This means greater access to data, greater sharing of data, and this is what we're aiming to convey in the middle of this diagram with the arrows running back and forth across all data users in society. Next slide. In addition to talking about the positive ways in which data can impact lives, we also devote a lot of discussion in the report to the point that creating greater access for data produces these positive potentials, returns to data, but also creates opportunity for data to be misused to harmful effects across all pathways. So how can we balance this need to use data more effectively for producing social and economic benefits with the need to ensure that it is not used to harm governments, firms, and most importantly, people? Next slide. Realizing greater value from data requires both that more people have access to data and that data is shared more, reused more, and repurposed to solve new problems. But why would people across all three pathways we described do this? What do they stand to gain from sharing data? And how can people trust that they and their data will be protected against harmful misuse of data? Without trust, they will not participate. Ensuring participation also requires that people stand to gain in some way that they share value. So the broad nature of these questions and concerns points to the need to get all of society to engage in dialogue around developing a social contract for data. By this, we mean an agreement among all participants in the process of creating, sharing, and reusing data that fosters trust, that they will not be harmed, and that part of the value created by data will accrue equitably. It's about agreeing on the rights and rules governing data use. In this report, we're very clear that social contracts will differ in all countries, reflecting the heterogeneity of cultures, values, and laws, but we do assert that all social contracts need to be based in value, trust, and equity. Social contracts have existed for centuries. They're reflected in legal systems across the world, but we need these contracts to adapt to this new world where data is deeply interwoven into our lives. Next slide. The social contract is an expression of the broad rules and guidelines. Realizing this social contract requires a governance framework that brings specificity to the data interactions. And we devote chapters in the report to each of these elements of infrastructure policies, laws and regulations, economic policies and institutions to get this framework to work together to enforce that social contract. Next slide. But to realize data potential, this framework must be built around a data system that not only ensures safety, but also actively promotes access to data. In the World Development Report, we provide many examples of what these systems might look like. The state of Odisha with the disaster warning system is one such example. We take a broader view and we offer a very aspirational vision of what we're calling an integrated national data system, or an INDS, which can serve to enhance data flows across different stakeholders, allowing all to benefit from data use and facilitating innovative, creative ways of using data to solve existing and emerging problems. Well, it's clear that for most of the countries that are the focus of this report, they're very far away from this aspiration. We nonetheless think it's important to provide a clear description of what countries should be aiming for as they take steps towards improving their use of data. I'm going to hand off to Philip Wahlberg and then Daniel Mahler following, who are going to drill down into some of the details of what we mean by this INDS. Philip, all yours.
Thanks very much, Dean. So yeah, in this part of the presentation, Daniel and I will outline the framework of an integrated national data system that the report proposes. And we're looking in the first part at what is an integrated national data system and how it maximizes the value of data for development. And then the second part is a short deep dive into some core issues around the financing of an integrated national data system and of data more generally. Next slide. Okay, so we think of an integrated national data system as an intentional whole of government multi-stakeholder approach to data governance. It is intentional and whole of government in the sense that data are actively and deliberately built into decision-making in government rather than being a byproduct or an afterthought. And it is multi-stakeholder and collaborative in the sense that it integrates different stakeholders from civil society, public sector, the private sector, and international organizations into the data governance system and into the data lifecycle. Now that means shared governance structures between different stakeholders, and that different stakeholders can act both as data producers and users, and that data flow between the different stakeholders or participants. Next slide. Okay, so a brief excursion into the differentiation between the national statistical system and an integrated national data system. The national statistical system has some resemblance to what we term an integrated national data system, in that it consists of an ensemble of participants that jointly collect, protect, and disseminate official statistics. But in contrast to that, an integrated national data system is more expansive in scope because it encompasses data more broadly, not just statistics. Data being produced, exchanged, used by stakeholders from the public sector, civil society, the private sector, and international organizations. And so we view the national statistical system as a core part of an integrated national data system. And depending on the strength of the national statistical system, an integrated national data system may be built on the foundations of the national statistical system. Next slide. Okay, so let's look in some more detail at the vision of an integrated national data system. We distinguish here functions, participants, pillars, and foundations in the framework of the integrated national data system. Functions are about what happens with data in the INDS. In a well-functioning INDS, data are produced, protected, used, and reused frequently, open and accessible, and of high quality, which is controlled for. Now, the participants of the systems are governments, civil society, academic institutions, the private sector, and international and regional organizations. All of their data are safely exchanged, used, and reused by other participants in the INDS system. The pillars correspond to a set of building blocks that is discussed throughout the report, which are infrastructure policies, laws and regulations, economic policies, and institutions. And finally, the foundations are the underlying conditions and drivers that sustain an integrated national data system. For these, we identify human capital, trust, funding, incentives, and data demand. Now, in a well-functioning INDS, these foundations are aligned in such a way that they can reap the benefits of data for development and that they can reap the benefits of this integrated national data system. And so with this I've taken you through a brief overview of what an INDS entails, and Daniel will now bring us a short deep dive into one of the foundations of the INDS, namely the aspect of funding. Daniel?
Thank you, Philip. So lack of funding is a problem across the INDS, and just starting with the national statistical system, what we can see using data gathered by Paris 21 is that a lot of countries don't have a fully financed statistical plan under implementation. Particularly if we break this down by income group, see that no low-income country has a fully financed statistical plan under implementation. So there are strong financing needs. Now, the INDS, as Philip mentioned, goes beyond the National Statistical Plan. So the financing needs are even stronger. You would also need resources to populate the institutions that fulfill the function of the INDS and to ensure that other data producers and users have the resources necessary. There's a funding gap also beyond government agencies related to academia and civil society. Just one piece of evidence based on interviews of NGOs around the world revealed that they're constrained in their collection of citizen-generated data because of lack of funding. Now, donors can and do help close these funding gaps, but donors too tend to underinvest in data. So in the past couple of years, just around 0.35 and 0.4% of ODA was dedicated to statistics. You can see in the figure to the left, this number has been in US dollars has been fairly stable over the past years. In addition, sometimes there's challenges with the funding coming from donors, particularly national data producers who are relying heavily on donors might come to see them as their primary clients rather than the national governments they work for. There's also some evidence in cases of donor investments tending to prioritize data collection relevant for the particular donor in place of perhaps more long-term capacity and system investments, which arguably are what particularly low-income countries need. So these are some of the challenges in financing an INDS. Now, how can they be overcome? So in the report, we have many recommendations, and he will just mention 6 of them. They're all targeted national governments, but I think what you'll see is that many of them are also applicable to donors or to international organizations. So one set of recommendations relate to setting goals. For example, setting spending targets on data. We know from other domains such as health and education and official development assistance, where there are spending targets, that it can tend to influence behavior and thereby increase financing. Another way of setting a goal is to commit to building an INDS in the first place, for example, through a high-level strategic document such as a national data strategy or national development plan. We know that once there is a commitment for something, often priorities and resources and financing will follow. I think it's also important to consider all the participants of the INDS and notice that they might have different financing needs and there will be different financing strategies. For example, for NSOs, it could be relevant to create a line item in the national budget targeted at the NSO. We know there are cases around the world where in the absence of such a specific budget line, the resources targeted the NSO ended up elsewhere. For other ministries and agencies, likewise, there could be a line item dedicated to data to really make it clear the importance of data as an input. It's important also not to lose sight of civil society and academia, who often lack funding as well, and perhaps particular focus on the areas where civil society and academia can produce data and create insights more efficiently than alternatives. Finally, it's important to use donors effectively. So for low-income countries, this could be using donors to kickstart setting up the integrated national data system and improve weak parts of data lifecycle. For all countries, it's also important to coordinate the donor investments to make sure that donors speak together and that the investments are indeed with the long-term capacity development in mind. One example of this is India, which has set up sectoral committees where international organizations and donors come together and talk about their actions. In closing, let me just say that while this might seem like a lot of funding is needed, and we know that particularly low-income countries are really constrained for resources these days, it's important to consider data as an investment and not as an expense. In the report, we have several examples of how spending on data has been generating revenue rather than the opposite. For example, by eliminating ghost pensioners or by making sure that taxes can be collected more efficiently. So really spending on data should be an investment to the future prosperity of populations. So with that, let me thank you for your attention and turn it back to you, Ray.
Thanks very much, Dean, and thank you, Daniel and Philip, for that really comprehensive and very engaging presentation, and in particular for setting out so very clearly the vision of how we can derive the most value for data collectively through and by moving to integrated national data systems. And thank you also for highlighting the different options we have, and especially for financing, how we can overcome some of the challenges we see. And I think that has really set the stage very nicely for us discussing funding as a key element to moving and us achieving the full value of data. And it is, of course, a big challenge, but also an investment, as you point out. And I think this really does set the scene very nicely for our next part of the event. Now, just to say that we will not be opening up for Q&A with the presenters at this stage just yet, but to all our participants, if you have any burning clarification questions to our presenters, please, if you can submit them in the Q&A, the presenters will be getting back to you there. So please do submit your questions. So we will now move to the panel discussion, which is the next part of this event. And it will take us into further considering how we can implement and create the enabling conditions for achieving the integrated national data systems we just heard about, with the focus, of course, on the role of financing. So I will hand over now to the panel moderator, Johannes, who is the executive head of PARIS21, to introduce and kickstart the panel conversation. Johannes, over to you.
Well, thank you so much, Joy. Good morning, good afternoon. It's a great pleasure to welcome you all also on my behalf, on PARIS21 behalf, to this exciting webinar. Let me start by congratulating the colleagues of the World Development Report team. This has been a huge effort. And I think we could just get a snapshot of the great report, which is so content rich and which has so many interesting things to look at. So I hope this is an invitation to all of you to go to see their website and to look at the report more in detail. I'm also quite happy about the pitch that the World Development Report team has done today and sort of paving the way towards for this panel discussion. This panel discussion will focus on one aspect. There are many aspects we could talk about, and I see there are great questions already in the questions and answers. But we want to talk a little bit more about financing, more and better funding for data and statistics in this world. And I have a distinguished list of panelists, whom I will introduce just in a minute. But I thought I just wanted to frame the conversation a little bit, because some of you who have been in this field working on development issues and working on data and specific, you might just ask, why again a discussion on financing? We have so many sectors in development. We have agriculture, we have infrastructure, we have health, and each of those sectors is asking always for more money. So I think if you are an aid agency person, you will say this is nothing new. But I think this sector of data has a couple of specificities that we should appreciate while we are going into this conversation. So let me just name mainly three things that I think that will set the context of our conversation. The first one is, of course, the COVID pandemic. And we all have seen how important good and high quality data is for policy making that affect all our lives. I mean, many of the lockdown measures that we have seen have been directly dependent on data. And we have seen also, as we move out of the crisis, step by step, that countries increasingly ask, policymakers ask, give me the data to ensure my spending on inclusive recovery measures is matched with evidence. So we can target the people if we do income cash transfer. So there is a real need, there is more demand for more and better data. We have also seen, and many policymakers were to some extent puzzled, that many of the data we thought is existing isn't existing at all. We have huge data gaps. And we have also capacity gaps. It's not just about the data itself, it's also about the capacity to use the data and make sense out of it, because data per se could be just noise. But we also have capacity gaps and we have technology gaps. We have digitalization gaps. So in that sense, the urgency of investing in good data system now is very important at this stage. The second point is very much related to this, is that look at the numbers. I mean, if we see the billions, I was just asking my colleagues, looking at a couple of sort of estimates of what the bank has done, IMF has done in terms of helping countries to get out of the crisis. We are talking $100 billion, 100 billions. The current aid given to data and statistics, and George, my colleague from the OECD, has mentioned it, we're talking about 500, 600 million in sort of what is needed, in what is currently spent and what eventually is needed to get out of this. So it's a fraction of a percentage point for official official development aid. So current spending is low. The amount needed is also low. So it's really an important opportunity now to raise additional funds for this important part of our conversation to go out of the COVID crisis. And last but not least, I think we have an opportunity, as also our colleague Dean has just said, we have a coalition of like-minded institutions, the UN, World Bank, bilateral donors, PARIS21, NGOs like Open Data Watch, the private sector here with Facebook, that are all more or less aligned what we need to do. We have actually, for those who know a little bit more, we have a Cape Town action plan, which maps out quite interestingly what needs to be done. So we know somehow how much it costs. We have a plan. We just need to do it. So in that sense, maybe the last thing I wanted to share is this opportunity with the UN World Data Forum coming up in Bern in October of this year. It's an exciting opportunity for the data and the development community and the aid community to do something about the current situation, to put data at the center. And we have, and Haishan Fu will speak about this in a minute, the World Bank is planning to launch a global data facility. And at the same time, we have a network of statisticians, data science, and donor community in the Bern Network for more and better funding. This Bern Network is linked to the capital of Bern, as you can understand, and linked to the UN World Data Forum. It's for the first time a coalition of people who really want to make a change, trying to increase the investment, but also trying to improve the investment spending on aid. And there is one specific exciting project that we will come back to eventually later in the discussion, is a sort of clearinghouse to ensure a better matchmaking between the supply and the demand given to countries to ensure that additional money is also well spent. So with this kind of introduction, I'm very excited to have to introduce our panelists. We have Mercy Kanyuka. She's the commissioner of the National Statistical Office in Mali. Hi, Mercy, welcome. We have Anna Nesbitt, lead for the data for SDGs at the Global Impact Partnership from Facebook. Hello, Anna, nice to see you. Then we have Dominique Favre, who is the alternate executive director for Switzerland at the World Bank. Very welcome to this conversation. Then we have Haishan Fu, director of the World Bank. And last but not least, we have Ida McDonald, team lead from the OECD. So we are very well placed to have a good conversation in this panel. So we asked the panelists, we know and we have seen that the topic is very complex. So we asked them upfront to really focus on one main problem in this: what impedes more and better funding for data and statistics, and what can be done about it. So focusing on a specific topic in their respective fields. So Mercy, if I can start with you to kick us off, from a perspective from an African country, daily working in a statistical office, the World Development Report colleagues have given us the numbers and how difficult this is, underfunding. But it would be really interesting to hear your perspective, how and why it is so difficult to raise more and better funding, and what can be done about it. Can I please give the floor, Mercy?
Thank you very much, Johannes. Good morning, good afternoon, and good night to our colleagues from different continents. I have the pleasure and the honor to make this short presentation about Malawi. What does Malawi need in order to mobilize more resources, domestic resources for data and statistics? It is critical that national statistical offices, including Malawi, mobilize more domestic resources. More so now with the demand for data growing exponentially. Data has been growing, really, data demand has been growing really at a very exponential rate. With the COVID-19, before that, even other disasters, and even just for planning purposes, there's a great need for statistics. So there's need to have a good and comprehensive resource mobilization strategy. This is very essential for statistics development. We have to ensure that the strategy is an integral part of the overarching national development plan. For example, Malawi, we're talking about Malawi Vision 2063. That should also include a resource mobilization strategy so that the statistics development is a big part of the it's a big project in the public sector investment program for proper financing. There's need also to ring fence funding from both government and development partners for statistical development. So ODA should include statistics development. It is not easy. Even for the example, in Malawi, we've been pushing, we have tried, and we're hoping that we are successful, that the next ODA includes statistics development. There's need to sensitize the public, the media, politicians, you're talking about parliament, and NGOs to see the value in statistics and the information derived thereof. The value of this information, the necessity to have this information from statistics so that there are people to be speaking for statistics development. So there's need to engage parliament, civil society, the media, and for us to be able to do that, we need a good media person to interface with the media and also to interface with the data users. I wouldn't also want to emphasize the importance of private sector. Private sector is very critical, is important now, so that they should also be used. They can also be used to sponsor statistics development. They should be able to realize the benefits of good statistics for their research, for their marketing, even for production. They should be able to use the statistics. Then it's also important to collaborate in partner with academia, as well as the private research institutions. Malawi, for example, we've started speaking to NGOs and private institutions. I will not mention them here, but we have started collaborating with them so that we are able to not to duplicate efforts. We are able to utilize the statistics which they are also they are actually developing, they are producing, so that we can see whether we can leverage on what they are doing and be able to supply the same for policy interventions. Malawi's National Statistical Office is not yet autonomous, and therefore it will also be important to push for autonomy of the same autonomous status of the National Statistical Office. We're hoping that with that, maybe our resources can actually be ring-fenced so that we don't have to be. The final one is not least, is to have coordinated financial and technical support to the NSS by government, development partners, private sector, including private research institutions and NGOs. So there's really need for coordination and collaboration in the financial and technical support. There's a lot of this fragmented support going to Ministry of Education, but all towards the statistics. There's need to coordinate all this support. I think I'll leave it there, but it has indeed been a challenge to mobilize the resources. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mercy. I think you made it very clear to us how big the challenge is, but you also gave us a couple of pointers what can be done. I think what you mentioned is, I mean, I wanted just to highlight 2 points, is the importance of integrating statistical plans into national policy making, public investment, procurement plans, development plans at large. So this is not forgotten. It's written in the classical development plans, and it's not an afterthought. So that seems to be very important. You mentioned, and I'm glad we have Anna speaking next in a second, the link to the private sector, and that's something quite interesting that has emerged very recently. We have talked for a long time about linkages to academia for the private sector. That's quite interesting. And then the coordination and transparency. Here I just allow myself to make the link again to this Bern Network Clearinghouse, which again is one of the ideas of this clearinghouse that we are currently developing with partners, is to do at the country level exactly what you were asking for, is trying to be finding the information, putting the information more clearly out to ensure that within the country, the policymaker, the planning ministries have a good idea of what's already funded, census, specific household surveys, and where there is a gap, and what kind of donor support is available and what kind of support is needed for given statistics. So thank you so much, Mercy, for this perspective. Let me now move on to Anna. Anna, very great to hear your perspective. Thank you very much.
All right, thank you so much for having me. I'm really happy to be here. I'm excited to see a lot of colleagues and old friends, both in the panel and in the attendees after my, I guess, 7 years at the World Bank working on data and technology. So it's really great to reconnect. So my name is Anna Lerner. I represent Facebook. I lead Facebook's partnership response to the UN Sustainable Development Goals. That means a whole lot of different things, a lot of different strategic partnerships, but obviously here to focus specifically on our work in AI and data and see how this kind of contributes to the bigger piece puzzle around data development financing. Just on the outset, so give everyone sort of the same playing field in terms of like what are we even doing here. Facebook has had, I think for the last 3, maybe 4 years now, we've been investing in what we call data for good. It is an effort inside the company to find safe and privacy preserving ways to unlock some of the data and the insights that we have or that we can get access through our platforms, and make them, share them with organizations that represent a humanitarian or development mandate or objective. So this is not data that we share to anyone, companies or anything like that. This is specific curated insights and resources that we share with development partners. We do, I would say there are kind of 3 buckets of this work. So one is data sets that we build. So we build specific data sets that we hear our partners express a need for, or that we see a potential for bridging what we're really good at in our AI and ML models, and then we try to kind of create things that we think are useful for development purposes. We also do develop tools and insights, and lastly, we also invest quite a lot in the ecosystem. And I think that point is important because that was mentioned already during the WDR presentation, but also by Mercy. There is a real need to build capacities for these data sets to be used, these new private intent data sets to be used for public use cases, but there's a lot of capacity that needs to be built among the users for them to be able to assess the quality, understand the methodology, and then tailor them and use them in an appropriate way. We do that through lots of different ways. We build data literacy, we do gender data courses, etc. I just want to flag that there are 3 places, if you're interested in Facebook data, there are 3 places you can go. One is our dataforgood.fb.com website, obviously. You can go to UN OCHA and their humanitarian data exchange, or all our OECD or World Bank colleagues can actually access these data sets through the World Bank's Development Data Partnership platform. I keep singing Holly's praise, but I can't say I can't express how happy we are with this partnership and how it allows us to find ways to put our data to use for organizations like OECD and World Bank in a very streamlined and easy way. So that for us is key versus having these like one-on-one efforts to try to create a new data license agreement with a new organization and finding ways to export that and embed it in their organization. These type of platforms are phenomenal. So specifically, sorry, I was supposed to start with congratulating the World Bank also for this excellent report. And I want to do it specifically because for the last couple of months, this report has unlocked some really powerful conversations. A lot of interesting parties have come to the table and talked about the blueprint that this report now has become, and also what piece of the puzzle they're contributing to. And I think that brings me back to what role can private sector play? Tech philanthropy or technology partnerships has changed in the last couple of years. I think it's important to recognize that. I think there's a massive opportunity for humanitarian development organizations, NSOs, et cetera, to partner with technology companies. But I don't think you should think of the private sector as a traditional donor. It's unlikely that the private sector will come in and pay for things that a donor traditionally would pay for, or something that the government's own investments in development data should pay for. Instead, think of the private sector as an unusual, untraditional solutions provider that can bring solutions, technology, data set that could solve the development problems and development challenges that you all know best. So we often have conversations with partners where they say, well, we're interested in Facebook data. Like, you know, how can we make this happen? And I'm like, no, you have to tell me what is the exact problem you're trying to solve. It's very possible that I already have resources or models or solutions or data sets that actually fit that exact purpose. But unless I can hear a very specific articulated example, it's very hard for me to kind of justify that we will then build for that or support that. So that was my first recommendation. And I think the other point, I'll give you an example on that. We were told by a lot of partners that there are a lot of gender data gaps. So at UNGA, 2 years ago, we had a roundtable with some of the senior execs who we knew were experts in the gender data space, and we asked them, what are the biggest data gaps for gender? We got a bunch of good examples, and then we went back and we built a survey that we run on our platform that actually asks those specific questions. We don't do this on our own, obviously. Like, World Bank has been a phenomenal partner in crafting the questions, so we get the formulation of questions right. We have other research partners that help us analyze the insights so we don't like sit on, hold on to the data. But I just want to say that as an example where there was a specific ask, something concrete. The same with COVID. There are a lot of partners that came back to us and said there's massive data gaps in our understanding of how COVID is trending or where symptoms are trending. So we built these COVID symptom surveys to address that. So be as specific and concrete as you can when you approach private sector about what you need, and it increases the likelihood of them being able to contribute. Last thing I want to say is we surveyed some 1,500 development data experts last year about where they go to find data sets, because we were a little bit frustrated. We built all these data sets, we put them out on our website, on UN OCHA, and they're not really being used in the pace that we had anticipated, at least not if we think about the questions we're getting about private sector data. We want to use it, we want to be innovative. So we asked, where do you go find data? Why isn't that people are finding our data sets that we're sharing? And we learned that in many cases, people go to traditional platforms. So like the World Bank development indicators or OECD's development indicators. So this is to put the power back in your hands. You hold the key to these networks and these individuals and these organizations that need the data. We hold the keys to a lot of good resources and data sets. We need each other for this to be effective. If I keep putting out data sets that no one's using, no one's going to win. If you keep asking and you don't get any response, no one's going to win. So I think there's a big opportunity for more creative partnerships between private sector and development organizations. And just want to say we're here, we're in it for the ride, and we're very thankful that we were included today. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Anna. What I realize is that, as you said, Mercy mentioned that she's very keen from a country level perspective to discuss with private sector. So there is a country level dimension which we can look into and which will be very interesting to explore. And then you just brought more the global perspective from how international organizations could go together, and you gave a couple of very interesting examples. So I think we should look at both. And I think your call for a renewed look, what works working with the private sector in this changing environment of data ecosystem will be very good. And of course, from our side, we would be very happy to support on both ends, but in particular on the country side, what can be done. So thank you so much for providing this perspective. Now let me turn to Dominic. Dominic, representative from Switzerland. I have to say we have been working a lot with Switzerland recently over the last years. You are the host of the next World Data Forum, keenly interested in data and statistics, so it's great to have you here. Dominic, the floor is yours to address the question on financing, more and better financing for data and statistics.
Thank you so much, Johannes. I'm really honored to sit in this panel and to represent Switzerland. As you know, as a donor country, we have a long-standing tradition in supporting data for development and statistical capacity building. This engagement is guided by actually three main considerations. Firstly, as so well described by Mercy, countries like, for example, Malawi have to develop their own pathway and strategies for achieving the 2030 agenda. In doing so, they will have to address and understand the synergies and trade-offs between the SDGs in their own context. This can only be done if they have sufficiently developed a robust national data and statistical system to monitor their progress. Secondly, our biggest challenge in achieving the 2030 agenda, particularly after the drastic setbacks of the COVID-19 pandemic, will be to live up to the promise of leaving no one behind. However, any strategy to do so will need disaggregated data which make vulnerable population groups visible. I want to quote Swiss Federal Councillor Cassis, our Minister of Foreign Affairs, with a sentence he made during the opening of the virtual UN World Data Forum in October 2020. Only those who are counted count in political decisions. How to count the most vulnerable groups has, by the way, also been identified as one of the major challenges when we analyze the entire portfolio of the Swiss Agency for Development and Cooperation on Statistics and Data for Development in the context of OECD's DAX work on data for development. This gives me the occasion to commend OECD's work on data, to which we, of course, fully commit. And the third point, national statistical system and accessible data are an important basis to strengthen the responsibilities between the state as duty bearer and its citizens. So as a donor country, we approach finance for data and the three mentioned considerations both bilaterally and multilaterally. Bilaterally first, data and statistics are integral parts of our bilateral projects in a variety of thematic sectors, like for instance, governance, gender, health, water, food security, climate, education, and you name it. And as we do not have an explicit priority in supporting statistics and data in our current development cooperation strategy, similarly to many other donors, the way data is related to projects is not always homogeneous, what makes a coordinated approach and data comparability sometimes quite challenging. Ideally, we could feed in our data in integrated national data systems as described by Dean, Philip, or Daniel just before. Also, our concrete experience on the ground has shown that a lot of uncoordinated support to data can be equally devastating as the lack of funding, particularly in the context of weak national institutional capacities if the support is poorly aligned to the country's national statistical strategy. And this is where our multilateral cooperation enters. Switzerland has put a lot of effort to develop means for better coordinated support to data and effective support to statistical capacity. On one hand, we have put effective support to official statistics high on the agenda in the Global Partnership for Effective Development Cooperation. And on the other hand, we have rallied with our partners, with you, PARIS21, the different actors from the statistical community and the development community in the Bern Network you were mentioning, Johannes, in order to develop concrete action for an effective support to statistics ahead of the 3rd edition of the UN World Data Forum that will take place in Bern later this year. We are happy to say that this effort, in which the World Bank also participated, has led to very concrete and practical results. One you mentioned, Johannes, maybe the stellar result is the Clearinghouse for financing development data. It will be launched at the UN World Data Forum and will fill an important gap in matching demand and supply for support to the data and statistical ecosystem. I'm looking forward to hearing Haishan's thoughts about this new initiative. So to answer your one question, the major challenge we face actually is the difficult coordination of our efforts for a more effective funding of data and statistics. And the solution is partnerships with the OECD, with the World Bank UN agency, PARIS21, as well as with civil society or private sector, as so well highlighted by Anna before. Multi-stakeholder partnerships will for sure enable new and innovative approaches to access data, to share it, as mentioned by Dean earlier, to use and reuse it in order to be more effective and leave no one behind. In this sense, let me conclude by thanking the World Bank for their excellent report, which indeed has unlocked lots of conversations on data, but also to you, Johannes, and all hosts of today's meeting, as both the report and the meeting are definitely strengthening this so much needed partnership. Back to you.
Thank you so much, Dominic, also for placing your comment into the overall situation, why data is important, and making the link to the SDGs and leave no one behind. At times I have the feeling now with the COVID, we are very much on the COVID and moving out of the pandemic and looking at inclusive recovery mechanisms and measures, but the SDGs was the starting point. And thank you very much also for pointing out to the challenges you have as a bilateral donor to invest in data systems, given that it's data cuts across all the sectors, and how to do this in a coordinated manner. This nicely transitions to Haishan Fu. I already introduced you, Haishan. Haishan, you are in this field for quite a long time. You have seen it all to some extent. So really interested in your perspective and also the specific moment of time. Is it, I mean, from your perspective, how can we go the next step? Haishan.
Thanks a lot, Johannes. It's great to follow Dominic because our board and board's vision really guide what we do at the bank in this very critical area. So thank you very much, Dominic. It's really great to join this data financing discussion in the context of the 2021 WDR, what the WDR stands and recommend. To be honest, you know, since I joined the bank 7 years ago, I've been wishing for a WDR that will focus on data, But thinking back, I'm actually glad that 2021 turned out to be the year that the bank's first ever data-focused WDR was published, because this moment in history really brings together a variety of key issues and trends which have radical implications for the way that we do data. On one hand, the COVID pandemic has brought what the WDR advocates to the fore, you know, the foundational role of public intent data, the huge potentials of private intent data, and also the combination of the two could yield endless new insights. But at the same time, the pandemic also reminded us that in some ways, the data revolution that the international development community has called for has happened, but it has not been quite the way we hoped for. You know, as we also know, during the COVID, we see how countries in lower and lower middle income countries' statistical capacity have been squeezed, and how their operations has been disrupted and their ability to compile basic statistics has been compromised. This is due in part because of the pandemic, but it's also because of the long-term underinvestment in modernizing the statistical operations and data infrastructure. So it's really clear that COVID has made it all realize we can no longer ignore the urgency to bring the national data system in these countries into the digital age towards what WDR is outlined as an integrated national data system with the right infrastructure, the legal regulatory arrangements, economic policies, and institution and human capacity. And at the same time, it's about how to really pursue meaningful private and public sector partnership. The reality is that the widening data inequality will no doubt in turn further widen the gaps in the ability of governments to make informed decisions. Hence, will further widen the global inequality in its many dimensions across countries. So I just think there's no better time for all the government, national government and international development communities and donors to really realize if there's any critical moment in history, this is it for us to really commit to prioritize investing in data. I'm glad the WDR team has stressed in its presentation that the time has really come for governments and donors to set clear targets for investing government and donor resources for the foundational public sector data. And here I want to just quickly mention 3 points that in response to your question, Johannes. One is that we're talking about financing data. It's not about covering the cost of essential data production and use, but really in terms of prioritizing investment in data, which is bound to yield multitudes of returns. But here I have to say, this language change is very critical because it really changed the mindset of everyone involved. Although I also must admit our ability to quantify the values of such returns still remain inadequate. So this is one critical area that we all need to work together for. Second, I know that it's easier to see that how donors and others to channel investment in different sectors where some clear human development outcomes could be clearly monitored. But here I must say that sectoral investment has its benefit, but it might not always yield the desired data improvement, as the new data needs oftentimes must be addressed through a system change and overall infrastructure improvement, both in terms of technology and legal and institutional structure. So it's really important for us to look at how to really focus on investment in data sector as a connected, coherent strategy. The third point I want to make is that, of course, we've been talking about this chronic investment in public intent data, which really push us, or at least it should push us to think hard about what are the new incentive structure and financing models that we really need to invent in order to address some of the underlying challenges that the existing models might not be able to overcome. So this also includes, I'm glad, as Anna mentioned, also leveraging private sector's contribution. It might not be in terms of the money that they can channel, but in terms of the practical solutions that they can really help to offer to us in order to really join hands with what we can direct in terms of financing to really towards the most promising and scalable solutions to countries. Having said all of this, I still believe that the existing approaches, once prioritized right, could yield additional opportunities and incentives as desired. This meant how the domestic investment need to be really given the right priorities towards investing in data systems, combined with other international external financing complements that include both trust fund-based instrument as well as IDA and IBRD type of a lending instrument. I'm really glad the Dominique, who is representing our board in many ways, made it very clear the importance our executive directors or donor countries gave to this line of work. And I'm very happy to share with you that even before the onset of the pandemic, during the IDA-19 replenishment, the bank was able to receive a record 82 billion IDA financing. And much of this is connected to what we will do in countries to support national data system improvement and transformations. This included a commitment, data for policy, addressing the improvement of the fundamental need and for basic data in at least 30-some low income countries. And I'm really happy to see that just in last fiscal year alone, almost 2.6 billion investment, IDRD investment has a data component, statistical component in it. The challenge here is that how we can make sure those investments are coherent and connected rather than fragmented into just different sectors. And at the same time, it's also important. It's not just about channeling those financing, lending financing towards countries to support country operations, but also focus on the transformational need country have that requires our investment in global public goods, to invest in the new standards, new government recommendations of new data governance arrangement, in the new data technology applications that can yield scaled impact in countries that require consolidated, more centralized trust fund-based investment, so that we can really coordinate across relevant partners in order to make sure that we can generate those new standard tools and practical solutions that can be brought to countries, and at the same time to engage with private sector to see what can be done. And I'm glad Anna mentioned this development data partnership. I know at this point it's still a global level partnership between public institutions and private sectors. I'm glad OECD just joined us, but there's definitely an urgent need for us to see how such development partnership need to be happening at country level. So this is one incredible area that we want to also support. Let's come to this other new financing instrument. Yeah, Johannes, I just very quickly. Yeah, you mentioned this global data facility. I can talk about this in more details later on, but it's really another instrument that we are setting up at the World Bank under new umbrella trust fund policy to really complement other financing in data space in order to support both public goods, but also national and subnational innovation needs. At the same time, I really applaud PARIS21 and the Bern Network for having pursued this the Clearinghouse initiative. I know back in 2013, we have talked about the need for a marketplace to match making needs and demand in order to channel the best financing to countries. So I'm really glad this is happening. And we really want to see that the global partnership, the global data facility and this clearinghouse could move hand in hand in order to really make sure we're directing the right, better financing to support national data systems. Thank you.
Wonderful. I think we have a very nice flow here. We heard in the beginning the World Development Report's presentation, which sort of gave the big overview and had very practical sort of also showing where data can make a difference, and showing the examples, Haishan, you were this earthquake or that sort of the this hazard that came on and where data helped to prevent further damage in the future. So we have a couple of examples. We need to, as Haishan was saying, probably find more and make it investment and not on the costing side. We heard from Mercy what is from a country perspective, and then we heard the challenges from a bilateral donor in terms of setting priorities, and from a multilateral donors also to sort of engage. And we have heard also about the current opportunities. This brings me to Ida McDonnell. Ida, you follow this from the OECD, you are working very closely with the Development Assistance Committee, where OECD DAC donors meet and discuss. Aid effectiveness is very high on the agenda, in particular at where money will be scarce for aid. and pressure to show results. So please, very happy to hear your perspective on how we can get to more and better financing for data and statistics. Ida?
Thank you very much, Johannes. And to our participants, I'm sorry that I come last. I'll try not sorry that I come last, but I'm sorry for you that you have to listen to another person, perhaps I should say. I have a tendency to speak fast, but to be well understood, I'm going to try and speak slow, and will stay within my time. I have some information to share with you and I look forward to everyone's feedback. I also would just really like to thank Johannes, Jurai, and the team and our World Bank colleagues for inviting us to co-host this event with you, for all the work you put into making it such a success and have so many people join us. So thank you very much. My starting point here is, and it's been said, and so I'm going to try not to repeat what colleagues have said, but actually I think we're in a paradoxical situation. On the one hand, we have growing demand for data like never before, and that's including from the development cooperation business. And on the other hand, we have declining investments from at least the community that I work with, the DAC community, in statistical systems and capacity. So really the question is, how do we handle this paradox? And this is not just in a rhetorical way I'm saying it. Since 2000, we've noticed that there's been a 70-fold increase in references to the term data in all of the reporting by the members of the Development Assistance Committee on their ODA flows. So we're really seeing an upward trend here of interest in data, the term data, what that means in terms of projects. We don't really know too much, but it is a sign. So the key problem, because you asked us to look at a key problem that really, from where we've been sitting and what we've been really unpacking for the past year and a half, is that we need to ground the advocacy on more funding and better funding in a much stronger evidence and analysis on where current funding is going, has been going, and why. And that's what I'm going to share with you today. I think that it might just give you some insights into this kind of almost homogenous group of donors that we talk about, which actually includes multilateral donors and bilateral donors. The multilateral donors are actually financed by bilateral funding for some of their vertical funds. We need to unpack that and get a sense of who's doing what where. And just today, in time for today, we have just launched profiles of 14 DAC members, which account for about 90% of the ODA that is spent on statistics and data worldwide. And they really reveal lots of interesting findings. And on the Clearinghouse, I just think that we really hope that these profiles and this information can feed into the supply side of that Clearinghouse, Johannes, and we really look forward to making that a reality and a success. And then colleagues in the World Bank for the INDS would really be interested also in sharing some of our insights on the use of targets and input targets in ODA, because I see that you're talking about that. And some also of the good practices there, but some of the downsides also of sometimes having ODA input targets. So where do members of the DAC stand? And I'd just like quickly to show you the slides because they speak for themselves and I will speak less and be shorter. So if Susan, you wouldn't mind showing up the first slide. I think a contextual point to make is when we talk about funding, is that actually members of the Development Assistance Committee do not see funding, the amounts of money in itself, as actually the biggest challenge to building statistical systems. The bigger challenge, and this is based on a survey we've done with members, is coordination. A biggest challenge is alignment to national priorities and national strategies, and ensuring development cooperation itself is based on data. And these three challenges here that seem to come across as more important than funding are part of the incentive structure around how the ODA is invested in data. For example, ensuring development cooperation is data-based and some of the issues that you're seeing around fragmentation and parallel systems. But it also feeds into the non-alignment with national strategies. And it also creates perverse impacts in terms of coordination being much harder because the actual objectives are not necessarily shared. The next slide, please. So when we think about coordinating this finance, I think it's important to understand the drivers of the investments and the apparent preferences of bilateral providers of development assistance. And here we have drawn out 5 insights from an analysis of those 14 profiles. The first is, and it's really important to know, the investments in data and statistics by bilateral providers actually mirrors their thematic priorities and their geographic priorities. So Australia's ODA for data and statistics will go to the Pacific region. The European Union's, you'll see it in North Africa and probably Eastern Europe, and so on. And so it's important, if you're looking at coordination, to get a sense of that geographical spread of the expenditure. We're definitely seeing an increasing investment in sectoral data and statistics. There's no doubt about it, and the next slide will show you that. We're also seeing much more ODA and statistics going to countries in states of fragility, in fragile contexts. And I think this is a really important point also to think about when we talk about INDS and national statistical systems, because these are usually the very environments where governance is very weak. So how do you invest in national systems over the long term, and what are the practices there when governance is weak, when we know governance is so important, and the political economy when you want to build up these functioning and foundational systems. And obviously we're seeing more project type interventions are more important than joint funding. So it'll be really interesting to see if a global facility comes up. Will we see a pivot more towards that, which could help us on the coordination? And country ownership drives the results. That's long-term engagement in statistical systems. You're going to see more sustainable results. Now, just for a few surprising statistics, and then I'll be able to close. If the next slide could come up. What have we seen? A key takeaway from us is that actually money is there. It's just that the money is not necessarily being channeled to the country systems and the statistical systems, which implies that they're not necessarily a strategic priority. And we have to ask, why is that? So between 2010 and 2019, if you look at the columns, we've seen that actually ODA investments, bilateral ODA, and that includes their earmarked financing to multilateral organizations, is declining for general statistical capacity. It's a fact. It's gone from 38% to 24%. So how do we buck that trend? Do we need to buck the trend, or how do we get other investments to also be win-win in terms of building up general statistical capacity? And where are we seeing the greatest increases? We're seeing the greatest increases in health information systems, in health data, in gender data, economy, and agriculture. And I think if we look at the next slides, the gender story is absolutely, really, is almost phenomenal. But the key takeaway there is that making the link with the SDGs is really important. If it becomes a priority, DAC members will fund it. So we have to look at gender data. We've seen an 88% relative increase in funding for gender data. Likewise, the year-on-year increases in health data is up by 16 million per year. So this is what the story is telling us. We have to really think then strategically about what that means for how we work with together to get more of that funding to the statistical systems. A last point, a last chart that I'm going to show you is around this matching supply and demand. And Johannes, this is very much built on the work that you did with UNSD for your capacity development, where you asked NSOs what their priorities are. And if we talk about the LICs, the low-income countries, their highest priority is administrative data, support for that, but also around statistical sources, of which you have censuses and surveys. But surveys are actually very low in priority relative to administrative data. But what we're seeing actually is a real growth and increase in investment in surveys and health surveys. So it opens up a question for discussion. I'm not going to make any commentary on whether this is a good point. But it does make us a point, make clear that that matching of supply and demand is crucial, and hopefully a clearinghouse can help us with that. So what are the solutions? And then I'll stop there. So our research and dialogue over the past 2 years now with DAC members, of which 14 I mentioned are profiled in this new publication out today, and they're very rich in terms of information. And we've had good discussions with Haishan to eventually maybe do one for the World Bank. Let's see. But 4 priorities, we can remove the slides if you want, but 4 priorities are emerging, and I think they resonate with the messages of the World Development Report. We need to hear a very clear priority and demand from leadership in countries for support to statistical systems. There is a narrative of effectiveness and alignment that if ministers of finance, heads of state, and those political dialogues are talking about we need that investment may increase. Development actors themselves need to actually put data strategies in place. They don't have them. And these discussions that we've had around these profiles over the past 2 years have made them realize is that there's lots of things going on across their own administrations, even in Switzerland, between SECO and SDC and within SDC's own operations, that have stimulated these discussions. We had one last week with SDC, Dominique,
around, oh my God, what are we doing across the portfolio? Is this joining up? Could this be more strategic? So they need some strategies that look at the outcomes they want to achieve and put effectiveness principles in place. And the strategies must address the risk of waste. Let's talk about it. Waste. When you have duplication, you have waste. You're wasting ODA. And anchor the strategies. Basically, the strategies kind of have to work against those perverse incentives around playing with statistics. You talked about data inflation in the World Development Report. I was fascinated by that. For those results agendas, which somehow are so crucial for accountability to taxpayers, and yet somehow create those parallel systems in countries. And lastly, we need to provide incentives for joint programming and country level coordination. There is a great appetite for it. We know that in reality and in practice, it's extremely difficult to put in place if the objectives are different in the first place. So in sum, we need to be more strategic. We need to be more coordinated, both across the administrations within the DAC membership, but also internationally. And we need much better standards on what constitutes effective development cooperation in this space. I'll close there and thank you very much.
Well, thank you so much, Ida. This was really a very, very interesting tour and introducing these recently launched, I think you said today, right? These DAC profiles on investment in data and statistics is really interesting. So congratulations to Simon and yourself and the team who has been working on this. I think there are some very interesting emerging things that come out of this, which we should discuss further, but unfortunately not today. I realized we are already a little bit over time, but the highlight is still coming. The highlight is, first of all, I would like to thank all the panelists. We had a very engaging conversation in the questions and answers. So there was already some conversation, but I understand that there will be more coming along as we go forward. And there is a possibility to engage with the panelists, and the panelists might want to come back to some of the questions asked. The second thing is that what I can see is it's really important that the development community at large and the statistical community talk to each other. And this is, we have made good steps forward since 2015, but there's more work to be done to bring statisticians and the development data community closer together. So I really would like, I stay away from trying to summarize this discussion because we have two fantastic, some fantastic speakers. We have Neil Jackson and Shida. But let me give the floor. First of all, let me thank you once more for sharing your great insights and for being part of this panel. And Jurai, let me hand back over to you so we can start the last part. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Johannes. Thank you to the presenters and speakers. Our audience is still strong with us, 200 participants. I think it speaks for the timeliness and also the great interest we all have in this topic. So as Johannes said, by way of summary and to bring all of this to not only a conclusion, but to broaden the horizons to where we go from here, I would like to introduce and give the floor to two of our concluding speakers who will share their thoughts on what they take away with them from this interesting and very broad and engaging discussion. So please allow me to introduce Mr. Neil Jackson, who is Chief Statistician at the UK Foreign, Commonwealth and Development Office, and Ms. Shada Bedi, Managing Director and co-founder of the US-based NGO Open Data Watch. So Neil, if I may give you the floor first for your thoughts, you have 5 minutes.
Thank you very much, Jurai, and thank you to PARIS21 and the OECD DAC and the World Bank for hosting this event. I definitely have a lot of really good messages coming out of the discussion from a lot of different perspectives. And one of my takeaways is that this World Development Report has indeed come at a really timely moment on the back of the pandemic, when there's been a lot of demand for data. We all sort of seized of the importance of it, and the challenge now is how do we actually follow through on that? And I think we've had some really interesting insights into sort of what some of the challenges are, but I think we're beginning to see the shape of solutions coming out in terms of how we can do better. The focus of the discussion has very much been on financing, and sustainable financing in many ways has to come from the country itself. That's where you get the country ownership and the country leadership. And I think I like the suggestions from the World Bank in terms of this is not something, there's not enough money going in, but also we don't have enough information about what money does go in. and the idea that, can this become much more within government's public expenditure lines, have information about how much is going towards the national statistical system, how much is going toward different types of data by different producers. I think getting that sort of information would definitely help to put the spotlight on it. But also, it's not just the money, it's what you're getting for the money. And another interesting aspect of the World Development Report was the new measure that's been launched by the World Bank in terms of statistical performance index. In the past, within the work I've been doing, we used a previous measure that the World Bank used, but it was rather unreliable. I think a lot of thoughts get into this new measure of performance, and I think to combine information about how much money is going in, you really want to know how our country is progressing, and having a good measure of performance, I think, is really, really helpful. I think that's useful for all of the different stakeholders involved in this, but not least within countries themselves. For countries like Malawi to be able to sort of see how is their performance measuring up, what are the different dimensions of performance, and how can that be improved. So I think these are two really, really complementary measures, better information about what money goes in, but also how are we actually doing. So some of the themes coming out of the discussion are very well made. We heard a lot from, in terms of the role of donors. And I think a key message I take away is that donors are putting some money in, but we don't have a good enough idea of how to make that most effective. And I think some of the pitfalls that are sort of highlighted in this, and again, this is highlighted in the report, is the risk of donors determining the type of data that's needed, which causes the wrong incentives in terms of getting behind country priorities. And I think finding ways of tackling that is really important. And in that end, I really welcome the work that's been carried out by the OECD DAC in terms of country profiles. So I think we need to understand better how donors are contributing. And I think these profiles are being launched today, hold a mirror up to ourselves, telling us this is what we're doing. But I think this provides an opportunity for us to learn about how we can do better. And I think one of the sort of themes for me coming out of this discussion today is, what are we learning from the different activities that are taking place? And how is that sort of helping to feed into doing things better? I'd mentioned the lack of donor strategies. So we talk a lot about the importance of national development strategies. And Dominic made this point about how this can help align support behind what is going into strengthening the system. And I think that's really important. But also in terms of how we can join up and work in partnership together, provide a better sort of set of partnership working. So those are my key takeaways. I think this is a really important time. We've all got the focus in terms of how to do things. And I guess my final point is the suggestion of a clearinghouse and looking ahead to the World Development Forum. I think having that sort of information in terms of what is the demand, where are the gaps, where is the supply coming, I think that sounds really important. And in terms of the platform that's being developed, what might be really useful, and I think PARIS21 has got a great convening role in this, is sort of thinking of this as a collaboration platform whereby all the different partners who are interested in this can sort of feed in and sort of see what is happening. And also I think that could help inform dialogues in terms of how we all work together to address the better data that we need in terms of strengthening data systems. Thank you very much.
Thanks very much, Neil, for those very helpful, also clear insights on the conversation today and how we can follow up and build on these solutions and these different perspectives we've heard. So I'd like to now turn to Shada, if you'd like to share with us your key takeaways and key points you're taking home with you. The floor is yours.
Thanks, Yorai, and thanks everyone. I'm going to be cheerful and take the challenge of being the 10th speaker today. This has been really terrific discussions, and big congratulations again to the WDR team for bringing out these important topics and also bringing up the conversation around the data for development. This has been super impressive, seeing the report, but also seeing the conversation that is stimulated. And I'm really happy to see that financing is being taken so seriously as part of the going forward with the World Development Report recommendations. From the financing discussions, 4 main takeaways from me, and I would be super brief because I know everybody wants to get on and going with their day. The first message that I heard throughout the conversation was the message of urgency, and the urgency. Johannes started by saying the time is now, and we just wanted to remind everybody that we have about 114 months to the 2030 agenda. So 114 months really is sort of like it wakes you up of how short it is and how much action is required. And the good news is that we only also have 4 months to the UN World Data Forum. That's when we're going to all get together and review the progress and where we are. So urgency, I think, should really stay as one of the takeaway from today's conversation around financing for development data. The second big takeaway is that is about challenges. And I think the importance is that we have collectively come together to define challenges, and WDR has really helped with bringing it out. It's often talking about challenges is sort of depressing. Everybody wants to talk about opportunities, but I think we should really look at the challenges. I always think that problem well stated is half solved. So we should also keep an eye on defining and better defining the challenges that we are facing. You all, the speakers, were great in bringing out the challenges, from country capacity issues to funding issues, to domestic resource mobilization, data use. Haishan mentioned the public-private partnership on data and how it has been one of the enablers, but also maybe slowed us down with the data revolution. So lots of issues that we heard from Anna talking about gender data gaps with Mercy. So I would say let's keep talking about challenges in a positive way and kind of agree among ourselves what are those priority challenges that we want to address. And for us right now, it comes to more and better funding for resources for data, and also better leveraging, as also Haishan said, other existing funds such as IDA, not our IDA. The third message that I walk away with from this session very strongly, and it's really encouraging, is all the innovations that are being applied to solving our financing data. We mentioned the WDR, I think by itself is an innovation for bringing out all the issues. We've heard of a lot of innovations around in DAC, for example, the country profiles that are coming out, partnerships between the World Bank and OECD and Facebook, for example, around data. And three very much outstanding innovations from discussions. One is that the creation of Bern Network has been an innovation by itself of bringing or creating a coalition of donors and those who really want to have a conversation about financing on data. But then, very importantly, the creation of and congratulations to the World Bank for the Global Data Facility. This would be a great opportunity for building more and better financing for data. And of course, I'm very fond of the Clearinghouse, which I think has great promises for us to really build the bridge between demand and supply, but also articulate better the results that we are achieving around financing for data. As you all said, investments in data, not calling it an expense, but really an investment in data. So the third one was innovation. And the final and the fourth one that I heard from everybody is way forward requires collective action. And I think that collective action is something that we should really walk away with. Collective action in working together on research, on supporting countries, and on kind of really getting down to the hardcore priorities of issues that we need to solve. And again, WDR has really helped with creating that collective action, and UN World Data Forum is going to be our next step for bringing everybody together. I like to end by what George said at the very beginning, that now is time to advance this agenda. I think it's really, we should take it to heart, and we should take to heart the urgency of it and use the momentum that the WDR and the innovations that have created around the work of financing for data to make this happen and improve lives for more people. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Shada, for that fantastic summary. Urgency, challenges, innovation, collective action, and the call for doing more now, I think, is a really timely message and one that really summarizes what we heard today. So this brings us to the conclusion and the end of this very fruitful discussion and engaging session. And I'd like to thank all the speakers and partners for your participation, and all our participants in the audience who have stayed with us for this event throughout. All of you are still there, and we really thank you for your engagement. A recording of this webinar will be made available in due course, and we're happy to follow up and share the links through our social media when they become available. And to thank you once again, there are many links in the chat. Please continue to have a look while the webinar is still running, and to make sure that we stay connected and continue this conversation. I'd like to bring this now to a close. Wish you all a very good rest of the day wherever you are in the world. Thank you again. Bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you so much.
Thank you very much.
Bye. Bye-bye.
Bye. Bye, merci.
Bye.